us are participating in this session virtually. The session we invited the Director of Water Science Division, Mr. Abu Abani, to say a few words to welcome you in the pavilion. I myself was there last week, but could not stay there longer. However, our director also could not attend this session as we have 41st session of the UNESCO General Conference started yesterday, and he sends his apologies. However, he wants to highlight the importance of this session, that water cycle is intensified because of the climate change. And because of that, we really need to adapt to water-related extremes, as we will be witnessing lots of extreme events with more frequent floods and drought. However, the adaptation requires also situation to deal with uncertainty. And there comes bottom-up approaches. The bottom-up approaches, UNESCO developed methodology with ICIWaRM criteria, which was published in 2018, and we teamed up with AGWA and ICIWaRM to organize series of webinars and global conference last week here in Paris. A quick before the COP26 in Paris, which really highlighted that water is a delivering mechanism of climate change impact to society. Water Connect and its prerequisite to achieve Agenda 2030. And the language of climate action is the language of water resilience, and many more key messages that we will hear from later in the session. And at this point, I would like to emphasize that repositioning water in the center of political agenda, and perhaps now as negotiators are finalizing text, I hope water will be in that text and it will get highlighted. So with that, we would like to assure you that the recommendation that came out from the global conference, as well as from this session, we will take into consideration, and we will also include in the implementation plan of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Hydrological Program's 9th phase, water science for a water secure world in a changing environment, which is starting from next year. And finally, I would like to thank co-organizer AGWA and ICIWaRM and all the panelists and speakers for supporting this event. With that, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. John Matthew, Executive Director of Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, AGWA, to provide his keynote speech. John, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to say that this is a 5-minute keynote speech, so it's very efficient, very short. What I've been asked to talk about today is how do we think about climate risk in the context of the choices that we make around water management. The conference that Anil was alluding to was, as he mentioned, was just before COP. It was preceded COP by a week because we wanted to make our lives just a little more complicated in the context of preparing for the water pavilion and other types of events. So we had this whole extra conference that we prepared. But actually, it was profoundly relevant. If there's a reason why risk assessment is actually an important issue for decision makers, for kind of high-level people, it seems like a very technical topic, but why should high-level people think about risk assessment itself? The simple answer is the way that you diagnose a problem actually goes a very far way in terms of framing the kinds of solutions that you're able to make. So you can imagine that if you're a physician, you come in with a broad set of symptoms. You don't want someone to come in and just look at your elbow. You don't want someone to come in and just check your pulse. You actually want them to kind of step back, look at all the systems that are operating, ask a lot of very broad questions before you're able to diagnose an effective solution. And I'd say that there are three reasons that we need this kind of new generation of thinking around climate risk assessments. The first is that, as Anil also mentioned, the water system as we know it is really changing, and water is a deeply connective medium. So it's across sectors, it's across institutions, it's hard to manage in many cases. It connects with often quite long-lived infrastructure and quite long-lived governance systems. And so we need to step back and appreciate that complexity of water as a system. The second is that climate change means in very practical terms that we have a really hard time seeing what the future is going to look like with the kind of confidence that we were used to in the past. An engineer or a planner might have looked at 20 or 30 or 40 years worth of data, projected those lines a little bit forward and said, that's what we're aiming for 2040, for 2050, and we should be good with that. Everything's kind of out of the box right now. We have, for people that have to order a certain amount of concrete, that they need to prepare for a city utility that's going to be facing a really clear future, that's going to be able to be reliable and provision water or energy for a growing economy. They need to know how to build it. And our existing methodologies in the context of rapid climate change don't work. The third, and this is maybe something that I became especially aware of the last 10 days here at COP, it's actually the inclusiveness element. It's all the people that are outside of COP that say, I want a voice. So the reason, if you are the head of a UN agency, if you're the head of a water management agency, even like a firm that's handling planning and engineering, running a utility, you're a mayor, you actually have these three distinct problems. Your old approaches to how we diagnose risk don't work very well. And this conference was about bottom-up risk approaches. That's the term of art to describe this family of approaches for risk assessment. And they have had profound momentum. The earliest versions of them came out in the around 2008, 2009, 2010. They started to go mainstream with very significant actors like the World Bank, like UNESCO, starting around 2015, 2016. The one methodology that's been published by UNESCO has been used, and by our count, something approaching 30 countries just in the past 3 years. So, and it focuses on these kind of tripartite focus. We need to think about water as a system. We need to see that system. We need to think about the deep uncertainties that are associated with climate change and what it means for building systems, for managing systems. And lastly, we need to think about a diverse group of stakeholders and how we bring them together for a really shared common vision of resilience. And those are powerful messages. They're political messages, and they have to be expressed through infrastructure and governance. So thank you very much for attending. We're going to hear some other great speakers. It's a short session, but a couple of other colleagues. 5-minute keynote over.
Thank you, John. Indeed, you highlighted the key elements, three distinct problems, and also the methodology you already mentioned that has been used by 30 countries, the methodology that we put together, published by UNESCO and ICIWaRM. And in the next talk, I would like to highlight how we are going to implement those case studies. As John said, we team up to prepare for this conference 2 weeks ago here in Paris, which gathered some of the case studies, but now we are going to implement those within the framework of IHP 9. And I would like to share some of the ideas, and this is still in the phase that we want to collect your views so that the case studies can be implemented in a right way, with all the ideas that we will gather from you. So with that, let me share with you my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. I hope you are able to see it.
Yes, it's not displaying the full slide quite yet.
Okay, let me just. Sorry for that. Let me see if I can.
Anil, I'll pull it up on mine, and you can just direct me through.
Yeah, please, because there is some problem in my computer. I cannot see. Thank you very much for stepping in. Okay, so next slide, please. I don't want to spend time. We are going to implement case studies in the context of Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, 9th phase of Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, with the title Science for Water Secure World in a Changing Environment. And the changing environment that I already mentioned in the opening statement, we have to deal with uncertainty, and which is emphasized by IPCC 6th Assessment Report, which is saying that intensification of global water cycle, meaning frequent floods and drought. So we have to consider all those elements. But also at the same time, water is a climate connector, which allows for greater collaboration. So considering those two elements, we will try to include in the case studies. Next slide, please. Well, probably John can tell us where the negotiations are heading. And I looked at the media today from the distance. The new COP places which could bring projected warming to below 2 degrees centigrades, slightly above 1.5 degrees, slightly above 2 degrees. There were several arguments on that. But the main point here is whether the negotiators are able to keep their commitment so that the world and particularly water community can feel that there will be a range that can be manageable. Next slide, please. And with that, and very first time in this IPCC assessment report, which highlighted water cycle changes, climate change impact on the water cycle, although it calls it says climate change is intensifying the water cycle. But if we look at the global data, for instance, only from the river discharge data, which is 46,000 cubic kilometers of water available, and human water consumption is 24,000 cubic kilometers, there is still lots of water, but we don't have water when we need it and where we need it. So it's a spatial and temporal variation that we have to deal with that. And as UN Secretary General said when the IPCC report was released, a code red for humanity, particularly for us, for water community, we really need to consider those elements. Next slide, please. And with that uncertainty of the climatic events, uncertainty with the downscaling, uncertainty with socioeconomic processes, we try to team up together, as John said, publish the methodology which is already applied in 30 countries, but also try to went into the case studies from different regions and organize a series of webinar which brought us together to the global conference, Adaptation in an Age of Uncertainty, which really gathered more than almost 3,000 participants from 142 countries, and 40% of the female participants discussed. And this was a preparatory process of that conference. Of course, my colleague later will present key finding of that conference, but that really prepared for us to this event. And based on the recommendation of that event, we are now designing implementation of case studies. Next slide, please. As I said, UNESCO's Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, which recently approved, and we are hoping on this general conference, which will adapt our strategic budget and planning, will include the implementation of ISP 9 Science for a Water Secure World in a Changing Environment, with the 5 priority areas: scientific research and innovation, water education in the 4th industrial revolution, including sustainability, bridging data knowledge gap, integrated water source management under condition of global change, water governance based on science for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, which laid out 34 output. And there are several elements where we want to include CRIDA and bottom-up approaches so that we can reach out to member states. Next slide, please. Out of those 34 outputs and 5 priority areas, I would like to highlight a couple of those. Priority area 1, scientific research and innovation, where we will include citizen science. Now, CRIDA starts with the shared vision workshop, inclusiveness with the citizens' involvement in identifying problems, but also engaging citizens in stress test scenarios. So that's how we will contribute to this methodology. Priority area number 2, water education, and where we will continue to implement tools based on new practices, capacities of skilled professionals and technicians at water-related tertiary and vocational education, and enhance better decision, and also capacity of scientific community strengthened through CRIDA and other bottom-up approaches, and new framework and tools, including bottom-up approaches, will be included. At this moment, while we are talking, there is a member states thematic group who are drafting detailed implementation plan, including financial scenarios. So this conference, this event will really contribute to identify detailing of the bottom-up approaches that we will be implementing from next year. Next slide, please. And with that, we will also contribute to SDG Global Accelerator Framework. As you know that SDG 6 is off the track, and UNESCO's particular contribution is on capacity development, which we coordinate with UNDESA. Next slide, please. And as UNESCO also come up with the open science recommendation, which really calls for inclusive science, including citizen science, open software, open hardware, accessing the scientific information to north-south, south-south. So we will be incorporating bottom-up approaches within the line of UNESCO recommendation on open science. Next slide, please. And this will be a contribution to a United Nations 2023 Water Conference, which will review water decade, action decades 2018 to 2028. So we really want to go at the national, at the local level, picking up those case studies along the line of ISP 9 and trying to come up with the policy based on the scientific findings underpinned by those case studies and feed into the global processes like United Nations Conference, Water Conference. Next slide, please. And as a UNESCO stands for Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, we gather those information and to build a knowledge system. And here are some of the publications, including CRIDA publication, which we have published over the recent years, and including a policy brief. I don't know, John, whether there are any copies remaining, as I brought when I was there last week, the policy brief that we published together with AGWA, planning water resilience from the bottom up to meet climate and development goal. So I would like to invite audience who are virtually attending this, please visit UNESCO website and AGWA website, but also to the audience in the Water Pavilion, if there are any copies left, please have your copy. And with that, thank you very much. And with that presentation now, I would like to invite my colleague, Rita, to present key recommendations from the global conference that both John and I mentioned in our talk. Rita, over to you.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My presentation will be very brief about the global conference that both Anil and John had mentioned before. This conference took place. Okay, now it's going too fast. This conference took place in the end of October, 26 to 28, virtually in a virtual environment due to pandemic that we're living, and it supported the ongoing efforts to set the scene on the current status of hydrological cycle impacts of climate change, with a very high level scientific panel that gave some statements, also a great contribution to this conference. As Anil has mentioned, this conference was a follow-up of a webinar series that UNESCO, AGWA, and ICIWaRM developed during 2020 and 21, Adaptation in an Age of Uncertainty, which brought us case studies of applications of bottom-up approaches all over the world, and had over 2,000 people watching during the whole series. And the main objectives of then this conference, which we said before was a pre-COP conference to prepare for the event that gathers us here today, was then to introduce the participants on the benefits of the bottom-up approaches, to share applications on how these approaches can be beneficial, and identify policies and institutional capacities on how to incorporate them in national programs, climate finance, and also the private sector. So the global conference had the first day very high-level panels. We had governmental representatives, NGOs, scientists as well, with keynote speakers around the topic of water as a climate connector, water as a disaster risk reduction tool, and also a panel in which we discussed the advantages of bottom-up versus the traditional top-down methodologies, and particularly how bottom-up approaches can be a tool to address climate uncertainty, which is something that top-down methodologies heavily rely on. On the second day, we invited the speakers of the webinar series to share their experience from the ground, and we grouped them in 3 technical panels in incorporating the climate risks into decision-making through bottom-up approaches, facing uncertainty in hydroclimatic extremes, and the final one, water as a climate connector, water, food, and energy nexus. The final day on the conference, it was about how to bring these discussions to COP, how to bring the bottom-up experiences of the water-related stakeholders to the stage where decisions are made. And so we held 2 sessions, one on aligning climate policy and the financial policies as well, because without the funding, it's very, very difficult that something will eventually happen. And institutionalizing solutions, how to engage stakeholders and how to build capacity. So this was a truly global conference. We had over 1,200 registrations, which resulted in 1,138 people watching the conference from 149 countries. African states were the most representative ones. We had 361 people watching from Africa, from Asia and Pacific, 356, from Western Europe, 222, followed by Latin America and Eastern Europe. India was the place where most people were watching, followed by France, the United States, Ethiopia, and Nepal. And I would also like to add that similar to what happened in the webinar series, we had a very good gender balance of 60% males to 40% females. The conference was also live streamed on YouTube. Also here, the numbers were very satisfying. We had people over 300 people watching the live stream, which was transmitted in 2 languages. We had a live interpretation in English and French. The day 2 with 104 people watching, and day 3 with 52. The dedicated website that we have created to host all the information of this conference received over 3,000 views. And the communication team at UNESCO, together with AGWA, they did a very good job in promoting this conference with over 30 tweets sent, and a total outreach of over 16,000 people. So the main outcomes of this conference, as we've been hearing here today, the central role of water as a climate connector, water as the delivering mechanism of the climate change impacts, water as a prerequisite to achieve global targets such as the Paris Agreement, the 2030 Agenda, the SDGs, and also the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. We heard especially in the 3rd day of the conference, the importance of repositioning water in the political discussions and to bring them to the national adaptation plans of each country. But water not only as a connector, also we've seen water as a solution. Water is the medium for resilience, the language of resilience, meaning that most of the adaptation actions can in fact be done through water. And in this sense, the bottom-up approaches that we have been discussing help to bridge the gap of uncertainties, and they are critical because they reflect the interconnectedness of all the sectors. So the messages for COP that we would like to convene from the conference was that the development discussions should level up the development at a local level to support decision processes. And of course, related to all this is the promotion of open data and citizen science, because it is bottom-up approaches that we're talking here about. And we need to be inclusive, make sure that all these people have access to these tools and they receive the proper training to apply them as best as possible. Thank you so much. And I would like to pass the floor to Will Logan from ICIWaRM, who will moderate the panel. Will, over to you.
Thank you, Rita. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the information from the conference, which I didn't know all of that, and it's great to hear. But today, what we're focusing on really is connecting the UNFCC, however many C's that is, the upper level, the diplomats and the prime ministers, down to the water, the climate adaptation through water resources management, which is people with their feet on the ground. So how do we do that? And to start helping us out here, we have Marlon Pillay from the UNFCCC Secretariat, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how they try to do that with entities like the Adaptation Academy. Marlon?
Yes, so thank you very much, and thank you as well for sharing all this valuable information in the presentations before. Yes, so the UNFCCC started this program called the CAST, which is for climate action and support training. And so when we started this, I think back in 2017, our aim was to bring what was decided by parties in the negotiations that culminated into guidelines and modalities and procedures, and to bring that knowledge together with experts from across the international community and bring them together and provide some targeted training to national experts and policymakers in the developing countries. And so with that aim, we started to engage with various partners, first with the national GHG inventories, and we have a program under the CAS for that. And then we moved to adaptation. And that's where we have liaised now with different partners like AGWA and UNESCO and brought them on board so that we provide this knowledge. Now, why it's important is because we have seen over the years that countries, developing country parties have been submitting national communications, and they have been submitting adaptation communications and national adaptation plans. And in these communications, one of the key issues was capacity building and how can they enhance their reporting over time. And when you look at enhancing reporting, you can't enhance reporting unless they start to measure the situation in the country. And when we look at that in terms of adaptation, it's about applying certain methodologies and tools that would provide information about the national circumstance in the country with regard to adaptation, and then as well as what type of actions can be taken and what will those actions cost. And so that's why we embarked on this training. And we are very appreciative to all the partners that have come on board, that is making a success out of this training. We have completed the first training this year for the adaptation, and that was quite successful. And we look forward to this continued support from partners to bring the tools and the methodologies and place them in the hands of the national experts and policymakers of developing countries. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Marlon, and really appreciate your perspective on not just measuring and reporting what individual countries come up with in adaptation, but the importance of these networks of people so that we can share our information, share our wins and our losses on that. And that brings me to a very special institution called IHE Delft. And we have the privilege of having Dr. Graham Jewett here. And he's going to tell us a little bit about how IHE does great science, but also keeps their feet on the ground for water management and connects the people around the world in that area. Graham?
Thanks very much, Will. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts on this. And just to follow up on what Marlon was saying is that IHE is one of the members of the Adaptation Academy, and we were delighted to join that partnership because it is really relevant to the places in that we work. And I think the key thing for us at IHE is that we work in partnerships, and those are partnerships at different levels. At the global level, this partnership with UNFCCC and the other partners, Oregon State, Asia Institute of Technology, and in the Adaptation Academy, are very important in connecting us with the key national people in terms of the commitments to the NDCs and training to support those. But also at a global level, we're a member of the UNESCO Water Family. We're a UNESCO Category 2 Centre. And through the UNESCO Water Family, we have good contacts and connections with other UNESCO centres. And of course, the national contact points at the UNESCO meetings. So we connect very closely then with other UNESCO centres and with the national representatives in the countries in which we work. And what that means then is that when we start working in those countries, as much as the knowledge that we share from a technical point of view comes from IHE, we learn as much about the context in which that knowledge is shared from our partners. So it's a two-way street in the partnership. And what that means is that we include local requirements in the training. We include local experts in our training. And I think what that does is it means that we provide effective, relevant, and appropriate training in those lower and middle income countries where we focus. The other thing, of course, is that we're probably quite well known for our master's program, but we also have two other aspects to our training, and that is short courses and a PhD program. Now, our short courses are generally on demand. So building on that partnership again, we respond to requests from country representatives to develop training that's unique or specific to their needs. And through those training, we can be sure that they're relevant, they're being requested. And if we see a consistent pattern in that training, then we can incorporate it in our master's courses. So it's shared beyond just the country that requested that training, but more widely. And then finally, I think our PhD program is very important. It's a unique one in that we have many PhD candidates at the Institute, but they come from all over the world. Although we're based in the Netherlands, there are, I think, one or two only candidates from the Netherlands. And our candidates are all working in the countries where they're from, doing work that is relevant to the context in which they work. And climate adaptation is a big part of that. So we have a lot of information which comes back to us around effective ways of implementing climate adaptation measures in deltas, in agriculture, in landscapes. And we build that into our programs at IHE. So it brings a relevance and a topical relevance back into our training and master's programs. And an example of that topical relevance, if you like, there's been a lot of the talk about net zero at the COP this year. And the adaptation of strategies adapted with that and carbon offsets. But there are very many risks of maladaptation. And that's one of the aspects which we pick up on in our training courses.
Thank you very much. Graham, I'm hearing a lot about the importance of both the academic side, the science of water management, and I'm hearing about the connection to the water managers and the hydrologists and the networking amongst them, which IHE has, especially through their incredible network of alumni. So with that, the connection between science and on-the-ground water people, it also sounds a lot like UNESCO, the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program, and it's a network of Category 2 centers. And to explain a little bit about what a Category 2 center is, but more importantly, the kinds of work that they can do and the networking they do regionally, we've asked Gabriel Mancia, who directs a very important center in Latin America and the Caribbean called CASALAC. Gabriel?
Yeah, thank you, Will. Thank you to everyone. Yeah. For CASALAC and the Category 2 centers, is really important to try to highlight what are the best thematics or themes that the ISP is giving us. Actually, the phase 9 of the ISP focus on science and education as the great basis for getting data gaps and better technologies for the water security of the nations. In that focus, CASALAC carry out actions aimed at providing conditions and foundations to carry out better water management in arid and semi-arid zones of Latin America. Therefore, the way that CASALAC works is articulating integrated projects and studies for the countries of the Latin American and Caribbean regions, such as the definition of arid zones and semi-arid zones, determination of frequencies and intensity of droughts that are hitting hard these areas, and they are necessary for a better location and quantification of resources for mitigation and adaptation, actually. In addition to that, with the support of the UNESCO and all the water family that is related to UNESCO and its donors, CASALAC also conducts training courses and scientific and outreach events on this matter. So that's the way that we work, but I know that that is the way that all Category 2 centers are working. So that's the way that we spread the UNESCO ideas and UNESCO tasks and activities to improve the water security around the world.
Thank you, Gabriel. And I know that CASALAC works at several levels. For example, regional products like the Latin America and Caribbean Drought Atlas, but then you also work with the individual countries. Isn't that correct? Are there some country atlases as well, other products?
Yes. We're actually working. We actually work with each country. We help to train professionals of each country so they can make their own drought atlases. Right now, we are starting a new project that is aimed to train also professionals for each country in order that they can produce their own vulnerability to drought maps, so they know which area of their own country is more likely to be hit by the drought. So they can, in that way, they can allocate better resources in order to face these droughts. So that's the way we work. We work through the ISP committees, local committees of each country, so they can provide and they can identify the best professionals in order to be trained to conduct these studies.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And with that, we have maybe 30 seconds to wrap this up. We've heard people from various levels and various organizations. We need to continue working together, connecting with each other. Water is the connector to climate change adaptation, but we are the connectors to each other, to the UN organizations and the banks and the universities and the NGOs, the UNESCO Category 2 centers. This whole network, we want to stay together. You may keep your eye on just Google UNESCO and CRIDA, Climate Risk Informed Decision Analysis, CRIDA, and that will keep you up to date. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Will. I just want to mention that we have a policy brief that was announced, which we launched, and I said in my presentation. So Alex, if you can show that in the screen so that the audience can see the policy brief they can upload from UNESCO's website. And with that, I would like to thank Will Logan for moderating, providing concluding statement also, and also all the co-organizer, particularly Alex from AGWA, and Rita, who led the preparation of through the global conference, and with all the team behind from Water Science Division here in UNESCO and AGWA. Thank you very much. And with that, we end this session. And I would like to mention that we are going to implement case studies in the 9th phase of IHP. Thank you. Yes, and also thank you to the Paula, Nathan, who support really from the Water Pavilion by presenting the video, audio visuals from the Water Pavilion. Thank you so much, colleagues from Water Pavilion, particularly Paula.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate you coming. Have a good day.